Okay, we are going. So, all right, so here's what we're going to cover. I'm just going to do a little bit of level setting. I'm guessing that this group has a pretty good understanding already of AI because you're here, you're interested, but just to cover some of the general concepts that I'm going to be talking about. And then we'll dive into covering some of the AI tools that are out there. And I also have a little bit of a framework to give you for assessing generative AI legal tools that you see. And then we're going to have a lot of time for questions. I decided I wouldn't try to demo anything in the beginning part of it, but if in the question period, anyone wants to see anything that I have access to, I'm happy to show you. Okay, so I also want to just kind of show, move this off to the side here, what we've got coming up. So in a couple weeks, we are going to have a guest, Connecticut State Senator Maroney, and I am trying to find the link for you all to register for that. Hopefully I'll have it by the end of the session. And we also have a Google group. So if anyone is not already in the Google group, I will drop that link in the chat as well at the end of the session. But just kind of wanted to highlight what's coming up. Okay, so just a couple terms that we're going to be working with. First of all, artificial intelligence, super broad, but I just want to clarify that when we're talking about AI tools, we aren't talking about like the broadest conception of artificial intelligence here. Artificial intelligence has obviously been around for decades now, and people have been using it. Westlaw, Lexis, lots of legal tools have been using it. So we're talking about not something as broad as that, not even something as broad as like machine learning or natural language processing, but we're talking about large language models and generative AI. Okay, so kind of the broad term machine learning is not, is algorithms kind of learning from data. And it's trying to predict how something should be categorized or how something should be applied based on patterns it's seen in the past. And the key to it is that it's adapting without any explicit programming. So if you give your machine learning a whole bunch of photographs and you've tagged them, here are all the chihuahuas in this photo set, it's going to look at new photos and say, okay, here's all the chihuahuas in this new photo set based on kind of whatever it has associated and the patterns that it is detected in what you've previously tagged. And not always accurate, as you can see here, but we've had this for a while. So some examples like automatic categorization or tagging that we see in like legal research systems, recommendations that of the kind you would see in Netflix or Spotify. If you liked this stuff, then you might like these new things. Query suggestions. So if you type a question, Westlaw might pop up, are you looking for this? So those kind of things we've already seen for a while. And similarly, we've also seen natural language processing for a while. So this is kind of where you're trying to get at what the intent of a question is. And typically we see this as legal users in information retrieval, so like Westlaw and Lexis. So they'll take a keyword and they'll say, what did you really mean by that? And find associated keywords that they're also going to use in the query. They'll use it in ranking results. So if a word you put in your query appears a lot of times, then maybe that result gets ranked higher. So again, this isn't exactly what we're talking about, but these are some of the additional tools that vendors have in their toolbox when they're making generative AI tools. So then we get to large language models. So this is what we're talking about. So these systems are similar to machine learning. They're trained on data sets. But instead of just looking at something new and trying to tell you about that something new, they will actually create something new. So that's kind of the difference between them and the systems that we've seen in the past. And again, I'm sure this group has a pretty good understanding of generative AI already, but I do have some really good explainers. So I'll I can circulate these slides afterwards, but if you were to just Google this, generative AI exists because of the transformer. So if you are kind of just feel like you don't have a good mental grasp on like what generative AI is, this is one that I always recommend to my students. But I've got a couple kind of like metaphors in here for people who are trying to sort of understand generative AI. One is that you probably heard is it's like autocomplete on steroids. So it's not just you type in your phone like generative AI is, and it tries to suggest a next word for you. It's doing that not just on the like next word level, but on like the next sentence level or the next paragraph level. So it's taking what you give it and trying to predict what a good response to that question look like based on all of this data that I have in my data set. Oh, and thanks. I see Nathan has added where you can register for the Google group and also our website. So thank you for that, Nathan. And I'll also say, like, if you do have questions as we're going, feel free to put it in the chat. I probably won't see a hand raised, but I will see the chat. So that's probably the better way for me if you have questions as we're going. Okay, so really important as we start talking about legal tools is understanding, I mentioned that LLMs are trained on a large data set. So important to understanding what they can produce is what they have been trained on, what was in that data set. And for many of the newest large language models, we simply don't know. So the newest one from OpenAI is GPT-4, and they have not released the data sets that model has been trained on. However, one of their previous models, GPT-3, was the last one that they did release that data set for, and we can assume that some of this is at least in GPT-4. So we can look at that and get an idea. So for a GPT-3, the data set included a set called the Common Crawl, which was data collected from the web since 2008. So when you think about what generative AI can produce, it can produce things similar to what the web looks like. It also contained, I like to include this one, just it kind of gives you an idea of what is important or like what is prioritized. So the set web text 2, which is the text of web pages from all outbound Reddit links from posts with 3 or more upvotes. So if people on Reddit think it's important, then it ended up in this data set. It also contains some books corpora. So these are both open source books, like available things that have gone into the public domain, but it also includes many copyrighted materials. So this is why you are seeing lawsuits from authors, because they say, if it was in GPT-3, chances are it was in GPT-4, and they've also been able to extract portions of the books. And then things like Wikipedia. So another important thing to know about the data is that it's only current through 2021 in the free GPT model. For the paid one, which is GPT-4, so if you pay $20 a month for GPT Plus, you get it through 2022. And we also know that legal sources in this training data are extremely limited. So it is not going to have all case law. It is not going to have all statutes, all regulations, all agency materials in the same way that Lexis or Westlaw will. So I included this website here. This is a project that the Washington Post did last year, where you can kind of just look and see what websites were included in the data set. And so you can go and type in a website, and you can see New York Times is way up here, which is why we've got some of the copyright issues and why probably they filed the lawsuits that they have. So another word we're going to use a lot is prompting. So again, you all have entered a prompt, I'm sure, in ChatGPT. But what's kind of important to know is the prompt isn't just going to be what you write. It is also going to include hidden instructions that some people call like a system prompt. And people love to try to like extract this stuff from the various models. So I included in here a prompt that supposedly can get you the system prompt. And it says things like don't include copyrighted images, don't include, if someone asks you to create an image of a person, don't create it in the style of that person rather than creating an image of that person. So you can kind of see what's going on in the background. So this is going to be the case in legal models as well. And another thing we'll be talking about a bit is hallucinations. So I don't love this term. It's like very anthropomorphizing. AI is not human. It can't really see things. These are really just mistakes. And so you've seen this in the news a lot. So I'm sure you've seen the 2 New York attorneys from last summer who got in trouble by submitting hallucinated citations to a judge, and then even after pressed, with the judge saying, "I'm not sure these are real. Can you provide copies?" They went to ChatGPT and said, "Hey, can you give me copies of this?" And then ChatGPT was like, "Sure, here's copies of the whole case." And that's what they submitted to the court. And then we've seen this happen time and time again. I've been really surprised because that case from last summer was on the front page of the New York Times. I would have thought that's pretty visible and people wouldn't do it anymore, but it has continued to happen. And it's also continued to happen with pro se litigants, which I've been really troubled by. Because you can say, like an attorney, they have professional responsibility to, actually check the cases that they submit to the court. But in my view, like a pro se litigant, they might not know, like ChatGPT has been marketed as this great tool, it can pass the bar, et cetera, et cetera. Why couldn't it do legal research for them? So I just think that's something that kind of we should be thinking about going forward. So for legal tools, they're really trying to solve this hallucination problem. And one way that they're doing it is through this technology called retrieval augmented generation. So this is a way for them to connect their LLM to trusted databases. So they're not training the model on those trusted databases. They're not like creating a whole new LLM. They're taking an existing LLM, whether it's from OpenAI, the people who make ChatGPT, or whether it's from like Anthropic that makes Claude. There's a bunch of different models they can use, but they bring that model and attach it to their existing database. And so when you send a prompt and you say, I want some cases about what was Michael Cohen doing? He wanted early termination of supervised release. So you say, I want some cases about early termination of supervised release. And they change that into a query that works for their database, send the query to their database, get some documents back, rank them somehow, and then take little snippets of it and take those snippets, package it together with your initial questions, and send it over to the LLM. So the LLM is getting not just your question, but information about the sources that will answer it and little snippets of those sources. So then the LLM generates a response and sends it back to you. So ideally, the response will contain real sources because the database is given it to the LLM, and it will contain real summaries of those sources. So this is, I think, one of the primary ways that legal research providers especially, but also other providers that we're going to talk about during this session will work to ground responses in real information. Another thing you'll hear repeatedly is like guardrails. So this can refer to a bunch of things, but I think the primary things it's going to refer to is instructions. So like in that system prompt that are going to tell the model how to answer or how not to answer. So they're going to say like Westlaw has a product called Westlaw Practical Law AI. It's built on the Practical Law data set. So that retrieval augmented generation is hooked up to the Practical Law data set. And that Practical Law data set is really narrow. It really just is like some secondary sources on topics that mostly that business attorneys want to know. So it's not going to have like criminal law. It's not going to have family law. So part of the guardrails for that system would be if someone asks you a question about family law, don't answer it and say that's out of your knowledge set. So that's an example of guardrails and how they work to help keep the system useful for you. Another thing they can do is like look for patterns in your query. So after this hallucination, like panic, I would call it, kind of over last summer. A lot of the internal law firm models I heard were specifically looking for patterns of citations. And if someone put in a citation, or if the LLM tried to put back a citation, they trained it to say nope and just to shut down immediately. And I think ChatGPT was doing that for a little while too. If you tried to ask it a legal question, it would say, ask an attorney. So guardrails are a way of trying to limit or explain or instruct the model to do things. Okay, with some of that out of the way, we can actually get into some of these tools. So first of all, an overview. So when we talk about generative AI tools that people use in legal, here's kind of how I see that landscape. First, you've got like all-purpose chatbots, which people do use in legal. I would not recommend it necessarily all the time for some of the reasons we're going to talk about. But so that's like your ChatGPT, both the free and the paid version. Microsoft Copilot, which they used to call it Bing. Google Gemini, they used to call it Bard, and Claude from Anthropic, which just released a new model just a few days ago. So those are like your all-purpose chatbots. They can try to do whatever you throw at them, but they're not, the data set they're trained on doesn't include a lot of legal stuff. And they also don't have access to specialized legal databases. And then we have like what I would call multi-tools. So these don't do something super specialized. They try to do a lot. So some examples of that are CoCounsel from CaseText. So you might remember hearing CaseText was just recently, last year, purchased by Thomson Reuters. So they're part of Thomson Reuters now, but this product, CoCounsel, they call it CoCounsel Core, is a separate product. And then LawDroid Copilot is another one of these multi-tools. This is actually one that you could go out and try. I believe they offer either free or very cheap law student accounts. So if you want to actually try one of these that is kind of a little more fine-tuned to legal, that is a nice one to try. Harvey is one that a lot of the big law firms have been using, or at least have been trying to use. And then you have law firms developing their own internal tools, and that's happening more and more frequently. So I'll talk in a minute about what some of these legal multi-tools are trying to do. And then you have specialized legal tools. So the one I'm most familiar with, or like the area I'm most familiar with as a librarian, is legal research. So that's one I'm going to really dive deep into you with today. But there's tons more. So there's like legal analytics that look at court data and try to help make predictions about the future from that. There's contract drafting to help people draft contracts based on existing contracts. So you can say, I want my contract to have this very specific clause on whatever, and it'll go look in the data set, pull that clause, and allow you to put it in. There's e-discovery platforms that are developing new generative AI features to assist in review. Another really big area is contract review and analysis. So send a whole, 100,000 contracts into the tool and review all of them for a specific legal provision and tell you which ones are trouble, which ones are okay. Super simplified explanation of all of these things. But to kind of give you an idea of the landscape, so this is a generative AI map from October 2023. And this is just early stage, so this doesn't have like the big players like your Westlaw and Lexis, but you can see that there's just tons, and they're in all of these different categories. So again, I'm just talking about, mostly talking about research and talking about some of the tools that in-house firms have developed in-house and some of the multi-tools, but I could give an hour-long presentation on any one of these areas. There's that much to talk about. And here's kind of a broader one that includes some of the more major players too, so it's even bigger. You can see that like Thomson Reuters and Lexus and a lot of these bigger companies and eDiscovery, Disco, these bigger companies that have been around a long time, they're adding generative AI features to a lot of their products. So I also just kind of want to show you what firms are doing. So this is a survey just from last month, February, where they surveyed AmLaw 100 firms, and they asked them, what are you using for AI? They got 40 responses, and 14 of those responses said they're using CoCounsel already. Some said they're using Microsoft, so they're using Copilot. Some said they're using Westlaw and Harvey, and then smaller numbers, Lexis, and a few people said they're using NetDoc's generative AI. So I thought this was interesting because it kind of shows that adoption isn't huge, even among the AmLaw 100. So I'm going to show this next slide, though, which kind of, I think, gives a little bit bigger picture. So you can see here that CoCounsel is, and this is from, by the way, a conference I went to in, I think, January maybe, and there were around 800 people that filled out this survey, the attendance of this conference, and 790 people. I was just checking. And of that, this is how many said they have either deployed or they've licensed but not yet rolled out CoCounsel. But then a lot of them were piloting it. And then smaller numbers with Harvey, Lexis, Westlaw, et cetera. So this is kind of consistent with the other survey we saw. But what I thought was really interesting is look at how many are piloting their own projects. So firms are really trying to develop this stuff in-house. I think they're A, hoping they'll save money, and B, want to have more control over their client documents and their firm documents, and are a little bit nervous about putting it into one of these other systems. So that's my opinion of what's going on. So so when we're talking about these, keep in mind that that there are a lot of in-house products being deployed. So here's another survey from the end of last year, beginning of this year. So this was a survey that looked at AmLaw 200 firms as well as in-house. And they found that about half of all AmLaw 200 firms have purchased some sort of legal AI. A smaller portion of other large law firms, about 20%, and then Fortune 1000, so these were the companies that they surveyed, about 30%. So if you go to a big law firm, chances are there's going to be some sort of legal AI. And this kind of is consistent with what I've been hearing kind of across the industry about a lot of attorneys I know say they've just been like bombarded with products that their firm wants them to test. And I've heard of some firms even that have set up whole projects for summer associates just to test some of these new products. So they're interested, and they're trying to find these solutions. The case is a little bit different, though, for small to medium firms. So this is a survey done by LawPay My Case, and when they asked, has your firm adopted legal-specific generative AI tools, only about 24% of their respondents said yes. So that's quite a bit less than the big law world. And then when they asked, do you use generative AI tools for work-related purposes, only about 27% said yes. So a little bit maybe more, kind of more, I don't know if it's skepticism or wariness in the small to medium firm world. Yeah, and here when they ask, has your firm adopted a general use generative AI tool, even less, only about 3%. Okay, so let's get to talking about what are some of the skills that these tools can help you with. So this was again from the survey at this conference, and what I liked about it is they both said, what can it do now? What's most useful now, and what do you think will be more useful in the future. So right now they're saying summarizing, extracting, drafting documents are kind of some of the best uses. But in the future, you see answer legal questions and legal research come up a bit higher. So I do think this is where some of the products are focused and where some of the internal products are focused. So let's talk about some of the specific skills that we're seeing in these legal multi-tools. So this is like CoCounsel, Harvey, LawDroid, but then it's also the internal tools that many of the firms are developing. So I've included like just a few firms I'm aware of here, but I know there are other firms doing this. So one thing they can do is summarize or query your documents. So say you have a big contract. It's 100 pages. You can put that into one of these tools and ask it questions like, does this contract have a force majeure clause? Tell me about, like, just give me a high level summary of this pleading. Those kind of things that I practiced law for about 10 years, and as a junior associate, that is definitely something that I was asked to do quite a bit. Is just like, you've got this mountain of pleadings, summarize all of these so everyone doesn't have to read all the pleadings. You can also kind of do searches across documents. So if you upload a whole set of contracts, you can say, I want you to find the force majeure clause in every single one of these contracts and pull it out for me and maybe make a nice chart for me. You can also extract data from the documents. So, kind of similar to that, but maybe you want to create a chart of like multiple different elements that you want to search for within each contract, and it can do that, and again, create a nice chart for you. You can also drop documents like emails or contracts or even briefs. I think both the contract drafting and the brief drafting work in smaller pieces a little bit better. But I'm really interested to actually hear from people in firms how they're doing more of that. Another thing that I've seen in both like CoCounsel and in some of the firm specific tools is building a timeline from documents. So say you have a complaint and it is 100 pages long, it has this really complicated facts within it. You can ask it to build a timeline from that complaint so you can see what was alleged to have happened at each stage, and it'll output that for you, like, again, in a nice chart or bullet points, so you can more easily read it than reading the whole complaint. So those are kind of some of the things that the multi-tools can do. So one of the questions that I would love for you to ask whenever you're assessing a new tool is, what data is it accessing? So for the internal law firm tools, a lot of them are using internal firm data. So they're using like data about their matters. They're using timekeeping information. They may be hooked up to their document management system to be able to pull in documents from different matters. You can upload documents directly. Some of them can work with legal sources, although I believe most of them don't actually have a direct connection to like case law or statutes. But if you give it something, then it can help you work through that. Or if you give it a set of cases, it can help you work with those cases. So that's like when we talked about retrieval augmented generation, that's how they're working with that data, is they're using it to give to the model to help answer questions. But what about the data that the models are trained on? Most of these tools are still using LLM models that have been trained on the open web or trained on Wikipedia, et cetera. That doesn't mean they're going to answer the questions from that information they were trained on, but it means that that's what helps them reason, for example, or reason. I'm not aware yet of anyone who has like built their own model that they've used in a firm or that they've used for one of these like multi-tool applications. I do know that there are a few data sets out there that are being marketed as legal specific, and I just haven't heard about firms or tools necessarily using them yet. One of them is Kelvin. Another one of them that just came out recently is called Saul LLM. I think allusion to Better Call Saul. So if you're kind of interested in those, you can look those up. But as far as I know, those aren't being widely used yet. So I've got a couple resources here where you can learn more about these multi-tools and co-counsel. So you can learn more about the skills. You can kind of see some of them in action. So I'll circulate these with the slides. So let's talk about generative AI in legal research. So there's a bunch of these tools now. So Lexis has a tool. If you are at a law school, you probably have access to Lexis Plus AI. You probably also have access to Westlaw Practical Law AI. I guess if you're a 1L, you may not have access to Lexis Plus AI yet, but you will probably within a few weeks. And then Westlaw has a broader AI tool that will work across all of its databases, and I'm hearing that is coming to academia soon, but we don't have it yet. Then there is co-counsel, again, now part of Thomson Reuters. VLEX has a product called Vincent, which again is not yet available to academia. And then there's a bunch of newer products, like within the past 5 years or so. I've listed some of them here: Alexi, Paxton, MidPage, Describe, LawDroid, and I think that innovation here is amazing, and some of these have really cool features, and many of them are free either to everyone or free to law students. So I would definitely encourage you to play with those if you want to see some of the things that are possible out there in legal research that maybe Lexis and Practical Law AI haven't incorporated, so you don't have visibility in yet. And then we're also seeing legal research tools bundled into other tools. So I had mentioned that like e-discovery tools are adding generative AI. And one of the ways that they're doing it is saying, if you want to do legal research about e-discovery, like you want to know whether, I don't know, like these terms are going to be acceptable, you can do that legal research right within like Disco, for example. And I think we'll see other tools doing that as well. So again, I hope one of the things I'm kind of emphasizing here are sources of data. So what are these products using to connect to their LLM? What data sets are they using? So probably pretty obvious with Westlaw, Lexis, Bloomberg, and VLEX, which recently merged with Fastcase, which is how they got their huge American law data set. So they're using the data sets that they've built up over the past several decades. Case law, statutes, regulations, secondary sources, really big. So they have these huge data sets. One little caveat I'll say on the secondary sources is that they do have to make sure that they have appropriate licenses to put in those secondary sources. So in Lexis, for example, they only have their secondary sources in there. As far as I've been able to tell anyway, the secondary sources that Lexis itself produces, so like the Matthew Bender series, et cetera. So I think this is going to be an issue for a lot of these vendors as they're trying to incorporate secondary sources into their data sets. So what about the new ones, though? The ones that haven't had access to those huge case law data sets in the past? How are they getting that now? And so my kind of hypothesis is that they are using some of the free sources. So there's two sources. One is the Case Law Access Project, which is a project out of Harvard's Library Innovation Lab. And so what they did is they partnered with a legal research vendor that no longer exists. It was eventually purchased by Lexis, called Ravel. And they partnered with Ravel, and Ravel helped with funding, and Harvard went and scanned every single volume of case law that they had in their library. And then they enriched it with metadata. It was a huge project, lasted multiple years. But the result is that they have pretty much every appellate case from the beginning of American history to about 2018. And for a while, this was under an exclusive commercial arrangement with Ravel and then Lexis, but actually they are lifting the commercial restrictions today after 5 years of exclusivity. I'm going to circulate kind of towards the end once I'm not talking. There's actually a launch event that's happening right now. I'm sad for the conflict, but it's going to be continuing after here. So I'm going to circulate that. You should go and see. They're doing like super amazing things. So that's one part. Another part is this project, Free Law Project, has this product called Court Listener, and they go out and they built scrapers, hundreds of scrapers, web scrapers that take a look at a website and then extract the data from it and pull it into their database. So they do that with hundreds of court websites across the country. So maybe not hundreds, no, probably hundreds. So all state appellate courts, and then they also take federal courts opinions that have been marked and put up on Pacer. So opinions are free on Pacer. And they also have other arrangements for how they get those new cases. So the result is that that's pretty good now. It wasn't even a few years ago, but it is today. So these newer products are able to do really cool things. So I'll emphasize here that we're talking about legal specific products. The all-purpose chatbots that we talked about earlier are not really for legal research. They don't have access to comprehensive sources of data. They typically over-rely on internet sources like legal blogs or Wikipedia, and they typically have very little data protection. So I still use them a lot. I do legal research every day in my job. I still use them a fair amount for like research planning or for kind of general questions. So I might ask it, like, what kind of sources would I look in for this question? Or what search terms should I use? Or can you give me kind of an overview of this area of law? Tell me what scholars are most important. So for those kind of general questions that you might Google or look up on Wikipedia, it can be super useful. So I just wanted to add that caveat. Don't get yourself in trouble by trying to do legal research on a platform that is not designed for it. So you might be wondering, like, what can I use the new platforms for then? So this comes from comes in part at least from an article about Westlaw. And so these are some of the things they said, and I've added to it a little bit. They said are not good for generative AI legal research tools. And you'll notice what about all of these, or most of them, is that they require it to connect to more than one system. So rather than just looking at case law and statutes, et cetera, like requests for citation information about citing cases or supporting filtering the authority down to particular jurisdictions or comparing across jurisdictions, they kind of require it to go out to another database. And those pipelines, I think, just haven't been built yet. So kind of keep that in mind when you're asking questions. I found Lexis Plus AI and Practical Law AI to be really useful in questions that I might ask of a secondary source because they have a lot of secondary sources built into them. So if I want like just a general overview of an area of law, or I want the elements for a particular tort, and I want some authority for it, those are really good questions. I've also found it helpful in finding a statute or regulation if I don't know the exact words of that statute or regulation. And then if there's like a ton of case law on point, they can be really good at summarizing that and condensing it down. I've found them less helpful when there's not a lot out there because they'll still try to answer the question, even if there's not a lot out there. And that's where you could potentially get hallucinations or unhelpful information, even within a legal research tool. But I'll emphasize we are still figuring this out. So I encourage like a lot of experimentation and kind of even keeping a running list. Someone says doesn't do math or statistics. Yeah, that's a good good point as well. Okay, so I promised you kind of a framework for assessing these tools. So one is what I've been hammering on a few times now. Does the product have access to the sources that you need? So does it have access to primary sources, secondary sources? If you are trying to get it to suggest like contract clauses to you, where is it pulling that information from? Is it getting it from SEC or PACER, or is it getting it just out of its general training data, which may not be super helpful to you? Or are you providing like some kind of internal sources to it from your firm or ones that you are just uploading? So I kind of mentioned this. Consider kind of tracking your testing and what's worked well and what hasn't, and save the prompts that haven't worked well, and you can try them again a little bit later. And that's how you can kind of monitor how the systems are improving. And also talk to colleagues, like what have they tried? And if you think you don't have time to do all of this testing and tracking yourself, also talk to your librarians because they are doing this, especially with legal research tools. I also encourage you to think about how and where AI can fit into your workflow. So here's a research workflow just to kind of give you an example. It doesn't necessarily have to be just in the find me an answer, because I think that is not necessarily even the biggest strength of the systems right now. But they can help you understand the law. They can help you generate search terms, issue spot. I think they're really sensitive sometimes to precise wording, but if you already have an answer, they can really help you double check your understanding and see if you miss things. So that was the example of a legal research workflow, but you can also think about it in your day-to-day workflow. So think of things you did over the summer and think about like where in that process the AI might come in. I also want you to think about restrictions on use. So if you are wanting to use generative AI in something you submit to court, there's a lot of courts that are now coming out with standing orders saying if you do that, you need to file a certification that you checked all of it, or some of them say you can't use it at all. Some jurisdictions are also coming out with ethics rules or opinions or just guidance. You also want to think about whether you need to get client consent and, of course, what your firm policy is. I probably should have put that up on top. Many firms will have policies saying you can't use it, or here's the specific things you can use, and here's specifically what you can do with it. Don't put client information into things, etc. So you'll want to know what those policies are. I've gotten here kind of a couple trackers that are trying to collect all of these orders and rules. So again, that'll be in the slides. This again, this is condensed from a presentation I frequently give about privacy, security, confidentiality. If you're at a big firm, you don't need to think as much about this, I think, probably because the firm is thinking about it. But these are the reasons that firms don't want to use generally available tools for legal. They're thinking about our conversations that may contain privileged information being used to train models. Are the products keeping our data such that they could be subject to subpoena or subject to a data breach? Can employees or third parties access our data such that we're not protecting our confidentiality? Is the data encrypted in transit or at rest such that a bad actor would have trouble kind of like interfering and getting that data as it is passed through? Firms are also thinking about copyright, like are they going to have copyright issues with using the product of these LLMs? And again, like the client consent piece. a lot of firms are going to their clients and getting consent or getting affirmative consent to use these AI tools. And then they'll set up their systems so that maybe you have to enter a client matter number before you can start so that you know whether you are allowed to use that tool. So the final thing I'm going to leave us with is as we're kind of adopting these new tools, thinking about what is missing that maybe the program might help to build back in. And I think about when we shifted from print to digital, which was a number of years ago by now, but we lost something there. We lost like the ability to like browse and flip through a book or look at an index in the back. And a lot of the systems built that back into digitally. So you could still browse, you could still get to an index. So that I'll just leave as a thought exercise for thinking about like, what are we losing in this shift and are the products trying to bring it back in? Okay, so again, Nathan did include the, if you want to sign up to the Google group, I'm gonna see in a minute if I do have a link and hopefully I can provide it to you. Okay, but now I think I will open it up for questions. You can either raise your hand now or happy for you to put things in the chat. Oh, and I'm going to I forgot I said I was going to turn off the recordings. Let me do